Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you may be in the world. Welcome to today's conversation on Gift of Healing TV. I'm Sara Jane, and I am delighted to be joined by my co-hosts, Scott. Hi.
Hi.
And David. Hi, David.
Hello.
And our guest, Jackie. Now, are you Jackie D these days?
I am on social media, yes.
So I've known Jackie a number of years.
To everyone else, I'm still Jackie Deakin.
So Jackie, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. It's a real pleasure to have you here. We're going to be talking about, because you are a celebrant, and
Yes.
so we're going to be talking about my life as a celebrant, so yours. Share a little of your story, because I'm obviously aware of some of the things that you've done prior to coming to this point. And then sort of and what brought you to actually being a celebrant, because I am going to stick this question in right now. Actually, I'm taking it that being a celebrant, the way it's phrased and from what you've been talking about, isn't tied to a particular religion.
That's right. Yes, it's not. Anyone can be a freelance celebrant. You have humanists, you have religion, and anything in between, and we can deal with that anything in between, if you like. We can bring religious elements into ceremonies, and we can bring humanist elements in. It's really what the family want. So going back to your original question about what brought me to be a celebrant, well, I could go back 20 years really to the start of my spiritual journey, which is all part of what got me to where I am. That is when my brother died, and he was 43. I think I was 36 at the time, and went on a real spiritual journey. Where's he gone? Could still feel his energy. What's on the other side? So I started to explore, which is probably around the time that we met, Sarah, wasn't it? He died in 2000. And then a few years later, I then got divorced. So I went around the grief wheel again and ended up training as a soul midwife, which is spiritual support for people that are actively dying. And that was around probably about 2010. And then that's when I really started to explore my spiritual side. So I guess I took 10 years getting through the death of my brother and then my divorce, and then landed where I did, being a soul midwife and running positive living groups. So then fast forward another few years, and I had to go back to work and get what I call a proper job, and didn't like it very much, as you can imagine. And the soul midwifery, I never really practiced it, but it was so dear to my heart. It was something that was really calling me because of what my brother's death had taught me, and how important it was to honour that time when someone is actively dying and the time just after. So after I'd got over working in my proper job, I went off travelling and landed back here in November 2019 and moved back in with my parents at that point, and thought, right, okay, I'll spend a couple of months here looking after them because they'd both been a bit poorly, getting them back on their feet, and then I'd perhaps go and get another proper job. And of course, early 2020, we all know what happened. COVID hit, and I'm still living with my parents. Never actually moved out again, which is, it suits us all. It's great. And I started to look for what I could do without having to get a proper job. So I saw an advert. A friend actually sent me an advert for a registrar role, which sounded right up my street. It was to do with weddings, taking weddings in an official capacity, the legal side. I was taken on as a registrar, and I did the role for nearly a year. My contract, I think, was 10 months, something like that. And then I was on a fixed contract. And at the end of that 10 months, they decided they were making cuts, so they let me go. And I cried for about 3 days at least. Okay, so what do I do from here then? That proper job was looming again. But having really enjoyed my work as a registrar, I just sort of started to think about celebrancy and could I do that job? And certainly as far as weddings were concerned, yes, absolutely, I could. I know what weddings entail, having sat through over 70 of them and officiated at them. So I not jumped on the bandwagon, that's probably not the right phrase, but I went down that route. And I got some training for funerals. And again, that soul midwifery training started to click back in, that connection that there's something around death and dying that was really calling me. And this is where I feel I could do some work and feel fulfilled. So I've done a few funerals now, I have to say, and each time I feel, I don't know what the word is, but I feel it's really important for people to have that send-off. And what's happening in the broader spectrum of the funeral business is that a lot of people now are opting for direct cremations, which is understandable because they're less than half the price of booking a service with a crematorium. But it's having that sending off for someone, that ceremony, that ritual, that actual saying goodbye in that way. That's what's coming across as being the important bit. And with directs, people are perhaps having a ceremony later on, or scattering of ashes, so they do have a certain ceremony. But it seems to be in the moment when people are when that person's died, within that first 2 weeks, that is when I think it's crucial that we have this send-off, this energy, this energetic letting go, as you were, and starting the acceptance process. And I did a funeral today, actually, and I really felt that. I felt these two sons, it was an elderly lady that died, and the two sons, I felt really got what they needed emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, because they'd had that beautiful service and said goodbye to their mother properly. And it was just so heartwarming. One of the sons read the eulogy. It came from the heart, and it was just special. It was really special. So that's why I love what I do, I guess.
David.
Yeah, I'm finding it really fascinating because I've arranged a friend who's a celebrant for my service whenever that comes. And I think it does, like you say, everybody will have their own faith and their own belief in whatever happens or at that time of life. But I feel more and more people are kind of wanting that personal touch at the end. And I think the door is opening. And if it wasn't for all the celebrants and, that are going through and coming to the fore, I think people would really struggle in that particular time of grief. So I don't know whether you've seen an expansion of work yourself or more people coming into it, but it's like a global consciousness that personal touch can be put in place for people, because loss at the moment and everything else seems to be amplified with the world the way it is. And I think having that personal touch when someone goes home, goes to spirit, wherever, I think it really does help in the grieving.
Yes, yeah, and I agree, because I go and see my my client is my client is a funeral director, but they put me in touch with the family. So I always go and see my family, and they're at the stage where they want to talk about their loved one. They want to tell you some of the funny stories, and sometimes, yes, they're emotional, but it sort of gets them thinking about what they want in the service, how they want it to run. Do they want it to be more spiritual? Some funny bits. People often like to have some funny stories in there. And it brings that person almost to life for that last 30 minutes. And the one today, the lady was, she's a dancer. She teaches dance. And she had the last waltz as her final song. And so we sent her out to the final waltz. She was having her final waltz. And sort of, that was just so appropriate. And going to speak to the family beforehand and finding all this out, and then being able to suggest, well, what about a dancing song? As she was, and then they came across, they then found the last waltz, and it was just so appropriate. And would they have found that without the prompting from the celebrant to go and look for that? They may have done, but that's sort of what part of what my job is, and to get creative around really honing in on what this person did in life. Yeah.
And I think, as you say, it's a very healing time when healing is very much needed for people, for both sides, whether it's the person that's lost or whether it's the people that are left behind. It's a very healing energy for the whole kind of environment, which is important.
Yeah, and the shedding of tears. There's some lovely phrases that I use about this is a safe place, and then there's about crying buckets. There's several little things that I use, and it just lets people know that that's okay. We can do that. We're in a safe space. We're at a funeral. It's appropriate to shed those tears, but you can sometimes see people trying to hold them back. And I think, no, this is the time where you need to release that, and all part of the acceptance process. And as you say, the healing. So, there's so much to it. Lots of little bits, aren't there, that we could explore.
Scott.
Yeah.
You brought so many things up. I'm a hospice worker, so I hold space for many people, and it is so rewarding. I had never heard the term soul midwife. Never heard it. But is it akin to a death doula?
It is similar. There are similarities. Okay. Yes. We would hold that space. When I was learning the practice, it was very much about the stages of dying and what you could do holistically to help soothe that particular phase, like going through the fire where someone's often angry, or the earth phase where they're grounded and not letting go, and then the air phase where they're all floaty and nothing's real, so not really here or there, and then what's the other one? Wind, I guess. And it's a while since I've practiced it, so I think the wind phase is where things come in and out, and again can be a bit floaty, or water.
The other point I wanted to add on to, 3 years ago, my mom died 3 days before Christmas, and my dad died 6 weeks later. They were married for 65 years. They lived in the same house for 55 years. They were part and parcel of one another. My father, we almost lost him a couple times, and he kept asking why was I saved? And he realized it was to take care of my mom. She had been a caregiver all of her life, and it was his turn. And so it was right at the end of COVID. And so we buried them on their 65th wedding anniversary together.
Oh.
And we just asked immediate family. 75 people showed up, and I was shocked. But there have been so many people who had not been able to grieve the people they had lost during that time. They shut down wakes, they shut down funerals, they shut down, if they were in a nursing home, you could not go to see them. And the ceremony, the rituals are just so important. And I didn't realize how much, because when you're around death a lot, you have a different perspective on it, I think. But my siblings were finally at rest. They finally were able to take the next step in grieving. And rituals, as far as I'm not one for religion anymore. Raised Protestant, converted to Catholicism, and now I'm a practicing spiritual / Buddhist. So therefore, I don't have a church. I just am the church, right? But the rituals really, really, really come home to roost. Just having it back from Peru and talk about the Inca, where you were taught the Inca rituals. And I never really bought into the rituals as such, but when given the proper respect, the rituals take on an entire meaning of their own. And I love that as a celebrant, that you bring that sense of ritual that has been missing for so long with so many people. So many people who are not affiliated with any religion. And I asked them, well, what are you going to do when you die? Or what's going to happen as they get older? What are you going to, I don't know. I'll let somebody else make up whatever they want to do. I'm like, is that really the way you want to go? Don't you want to, we're all going to die. I know it's a hard lesson, but we're all going to die one way or another. We're not going to be here forever. And my dad was one of those people who was going to live forever. And he didn't trust me, he didn't want to talk about life insurance. He didn't want to talk about planning. He didn't want to talk about cemetery plots. He didn't want to talk about anything, because what do I got to talk about that for? You're just going to spend my money anyway. Well, my mom was a very different mind, and she was getting dressed one day, and he said, "Where are you going?" Oh, well, Sue, my sister is going to take them to the funeral home. Why are you going there? Well, because I want to make sure everything's okay. Now, this is a man who didn't want anything to do with anything. So he says, well, I better get dressed and come with you, because, just in case you have to make some decisions, and, I need to be there. So they went and they took care of it all. And that's the push he needed. And it's those milestones, those getting over the fact, yep, I'm not going to be here forever. Oh, maybe I should plan on things. Maybe I should let people know what I'd really like to have happen. For me, I want an open bar. I want a beer cart going around. I want stories. I want music. I don't want somber. I want there to be just tell stories, tell everything I did wrong. Tell me, tell all the bad things that happened. Tell all the good things that happened. And I really want to just throw a party and have it at that. And because that's the memories that I really want, and how I want people to kind of express it. But it's interesting because there is so few rituals left if you're not involved with religion, if you're not involved in any kind of practical organization. And it's a lot of those rituals, I think, that are missing from younger people, because it's milestones. It's like when you're a teenager and you're brought into the church, and then when you learn all your lessons and you're brought into it and you become an adult. My daughters, of course, Catholic religion, and the second they received communion, they decided that they really didn't have to go to church anymore. But at least growing up, they had that kind of foundation. But there's so many rituals that don't get done anymore, and so I thank you for bringing that back. And really making a part of the process of life, as death.
Yeah, it is, because there's a certain amount of closure, and you just reminded me of stories with my mum and dad, actually. They're in their 90s now. And like your dad, they don't want to look at it. They've arranged everything in their life. They're great organisers. They have lists of lists, except around their end of life. Yep. So I sat them down one day and I said, look, if I'm going to do this job, then, you know, you've got to come on board with me. I'm going to need your support. So let's start with arranging your funeral. And we both sat down and I said to my mum, I said, now, what sort of music do you think you might like, Mum? And she said some hymn. Love Divine, I think, or something like that. And I said, see, you know, if we hadn't had this conversation, you were going to get the Ying Tong song. I don't want that, she said. And I said, just see now why this is important, because as your family, we want to bring what we think you would have liked. You know, the songs you liked, not necessarily what we like. It's about you. You know, this whole process is about you. It's our saying goodbye, and we want to do a good job. And so they had that conversation, and a similar story with my dad. Said, now, what sort of coffin do you think you might like, Dad? Oh, a traditional oak one with the brass handles, he said. It was stiff upper lip English. And I said, well, okay. I said, they're quite dear, but, you know, it's your money. You have what you like. And so we went online and we had a few. And my dad, when he was in the RAF, he did his national service in the RAF, and he wanted to fly a Spitfire. Well, he got put in the engineers department and never flew any sort of plane. And then when he retired, he learned to fly one of these single Cessna things. And at the end of his course, he was offered a ride in a Spitfire or another 6 lessons. And he let his head rule his heart, and he went for the lessons, even though he really wanted the ride in the Spitfire.
Yep.
Yeah. So there we were looking at these coffins, and they were expensive. You know, we're probably talking 1,500 upwards, 10,000. And I said, oh, should we get the 10,000 one then, Dad, and be done with it? No, you're not wasting all that money, he said. And of course, as we scrolled down, we came to the cardboard coffins with pictures printed on them. And one was a Spitfire. He was sold. He said, Dad, you're going to get your ride in the Spitfire. Yeah, he said, and it was about £800, so half the cost. So everybody was happy. Wow. And again, that comes from these conversations and planning that, and flowers, and, you know, do you really want to spend £300 on a beautiful floral bouquet? And they are beautiful. And, you know, to some people, yes, it's worth every penny. But I know to my mum, she would sooner everyone went out in the garden that morning and picked a little spray from their garden to put on her coffin. So, you know, little things like this that we don't necessarily think about. We just go with, because my mum did actually say, oh, well, we thought you were going to take care of all that, dear. We need to know what you like. Give us some idea. So, have these conversations with people. You can make them lighthearted so it doesn't feel too heavy. But obviously there is a heaviness around it because of the context. So, yeah, it's all little things like that. And what you were saying about ritual with young people, young women coming into menarche, they're becoming ladies. They're becoming women. And it gets brushed over, and if it's nothing, and they just, you know, carry on with life. But actually, that's really important. And young men, you know, their voice breaking and growing a beard, it's a change. It's a move from that childhood into adulthood. And I really think we should be doing more ritual around that. I don't know now if the schools do anything of that nature, or no. Spiritual groups maybe would take that on board. But that's something I've thought about. There must be something out there that we could do to mark this big event in their life. Yeah.
My granddaughter just had a quinceañera.
Which
is a quinceañera, which is 15-year-old birthday for a young lady.
Oh.
And it costs as much as a wedding.
Oh, really?
My son-in-law is Puerto Rican, and he had one at 15 because he was an only child, and usually doesn't happen with men. But she had this dress that was I think cost more than a wedding dress, and she had six of her best friends all in like bridesmaids. So it's coming out in the Spanish, and absolutely amazing and beautiful. And it just, I understand the ritual. I don't understand the expense, but I understand the ritual.
Yes.
My dad's funeral, sort of, I had this amazing pair of patchwork trousers, and my mother said, and they're multicolored. I still got them, and my mother said to me, "Your dad always loved to see you in those." She said, for the funeral, which was in a Catholic church, and I was going to be standing on the altar doing a reading, and she wanted me to wear those trousers.
Wow.
It's just like, but if that's what Dad would have appreciated, then that was totally the right thing to do. And my godmother is a nun, so I was very much raised a Catholic, and I have very much now would turn around and say, I'm spiritual. It's got nothing to do with any religion. I sort of very much walked away from, and she sort of kept saying, on that Dad's anniversary, she'd like to go to church. It was, Mum, I can't do it. I went the year after Dad had died. I just couldn't do it. It was, for me, it was hypocritical to walk into a Catholic church, because I've separated myself from that. I have beliefs, but they go way, way beyond, as I think for most of us that would class ourselves as spiritual, they go way beyond any of the religions. But it was just that for Dad, it was important. That's what, and he would have probably been there smiling. So that's why.
Yeah, and that's about honor, and that's about respect, which is totally appropriate at the end of life. You know, that person's had a life; they've been through a miracle, you know, and they've lived their life and usually had a good life. Even though it sometimes doesn't feel like it when we're going through stuff, but most of us, certainly in the Western world, we live a good life, and that definitely needs to be honoured. So, yes, you know, that is, I think that's lovely.
Well, the day before he died, I was actually down there, but sort of a couple of weeks before that, I'd been down there, and being a Reiki master and being able to teach as well. And I was working with him, a session with him, with the sound, with the Reiki. And I suddenly got this thought. And I sort of said to him, when I finished the session, would you like me to attune you to the Reiki so that every time you go for a sleep, I mean, he'd had 4 different cancers, chemotherapy, radiotherapy. I mean, he really, bless him, was not in a good place. And he'd been so well most of his life. And I said, would you like me to attune you to the Reiki so that every time you go for a sleep, you can open the channel for yourself? And his reaction was, are you sure you're allowed to do that? And I said, I do not believe the thought would have come to me if I wasn't. You haven't got to go through the 2 days of training. I will just attune you, and I will share with you how you open the Reiki channel. I won't remember how to. I said, oh, yes, you will. It is so easy at level 1, and that's all we'll be doing. And so he said, yes, please, if you're sure that's all right. So I attuned him to the Reiki. I showed him how to open the Reiki channel. The day before he died, I walked into the bedroom where he was lying on the bed, and he raised his hands in prayer position. And he just kept repeating the opening of the channel over and over and over again. Basically, his prayer was, let this be over. His mother had died when he was 5. And he wanted his mother. He didn't want to leave my mum and us 3 girls. But with everything that he was going through, he wanted his mum. Understandably, it was the little boy back, having lost a mother at 5. And I sat with him and I said to him, thank you for being my dad. I said, your mother is here. She's waiting for you. So's your dad. So's Gillian, who was my sister that died at 9 weeks old. And my mother, we believe, miscarried 2 boys. She certainly had 2 miscarriages. And I said, the 2 boys are also here waiting for you. I gave him permission to let go. Within 24 hours.
Yeah.
And 2 years after that, my mother had met somebody else. They were together for about 7 years. And then he got a hardening of his lungs, so he could hardly breathe. And he was very definitely end of life. And he was miles away from me, miles and miles away from me. And she rang me and she said, Sarah, will you please give him permission to let go? And it was just like, yeah, I was in the room with Dad. And I didn't think I'd actually told her that because for her it was too quick. But I couldn't watch my father go through what he was going through. Plus the fact he wouldn't have let go until he was ready to let go. And so sort of it was just like, how can I do this? And so I thought, okay, I've heard that we can ask our angels to speak to somebody else's angels. But at the end of the day, it still has to be their choice. But I thought, well, I did that. I did ask my angels to speak to his angels. But I also thought, hang on a second, we're all connected. So I asked my soul to speak to his. Again, within 24 hours, he'd gone. He'd let go. Now, would that have been any different for either one of those if I hadn't done what I'd done? We are never, ever going to know. But people who are actually suffering, why would we do that to them?
Yeah.
And they're giving them permission. I love the way, and I know you've met Neil Donald Walsh because you invited him over to England and he gave a talk through your sort of, and I couldn't go because I was giving a talk elsewhere that night.
Oh.
So, but I had previously met him. So, but the way I love the way he puts it, and it's our continuation day.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I love that. You know, the acceptance of helping my father to move on was because his physical body's gone, but his soul isn't. When my mother keeps saying, I want to go up to see your dad because you scattered his ashes up at Haytor in the quarry at the back of Haytor on Dartmoor. And she's like, Mum, he's right here in the room with you. You haven't got to go all up the way up there. And most of the family were with her. Children with her for the scattering of the ashes. So I think, yes, it's important, but it's also important for the family to be able to do the private thing as well.
Yes. And when my brother passed, he had he still has got a grave in a cemetery. And my mum and dad religiously go 3 times a year, on his birthday, on his continuation day, and at Christmas. At least 3. I mean, there's several other times during the year as well, but they always go on those 3 times. And for them, that's really important. That's how they feel their connection to him or whatever they're feeling. For me, I didn't need that because I still felt my spiritual practices have led me to be able to still feel presence or to tap into energy, and with the strong belief there's definitely something on the other side of our continuation day. Yeah, for sure. But for them, they didn't have that. They've never looked at their spiritual side at all. So it was really important. And we go to the cemetery. There's obviously always other families there as well doing the same thing. And it can be really important because it gives them a focus somewhere to go to still be connected, and I guess that's their spiritual side talking to them as well. So it is still there. They're just not conscious of that. And, yeah.
David.
There's a couple of things I'd like to speak about, and that is he was talking about we kind of hang on so much to people towards the end of their life, and we don't want them to go, which is really natural, but we do tend to hold the spirit back from continuing. So it's very hard, as you say, but to give permission for that soul to go is really a lovely thing to do. And say, okay, you're free to go. We're okay here. But I think sometimes we get caught up in, we don't want you to go for our sake, which I've been through it. But with the Celebrant, isn't it lovely that you can bring the colour, because it is a celebration of life, because those people, whether we've gone through, who knows what we sign up for to come here, but we go through what we need to go through, our ups and our downs and our roundabouts, but we should celebrate that for them, because that heavy energy, which we will all get grief, but that additional heavy energy, does that not hold their spirit back from going? And let's say thank you for all you've done, all your memories, because that's what we have when we go, all the memories of this beautiful. And we should be remembering all those funny stories, or all those trip ups and everything else that we've had along the way. And does that not, you feel, help the soul in its transition from here to wherever it may be going?
Absolutely. Yes. And on that note, when my brother passed, he had gone to what you would call a happy clappy church, the King's Church, where they sang a lot. It was all quite jolly, and but he had got very much into the religious side of it, following Jesus's story, etc. And it really comforted him when he was ill, and it really helped him through a very difficult time. So when he passed, we were all sat around his bed. The nurse had said it's probably going to be the next 24 hours. So we sat around his bed all night. There was about 4 or 5 of us, and it's 6 o'clock in the morning. It was summer, so it was quite warm, and it was light early. He suddenly woke up and sat up in bed and said, "Oh, are we having a party?" We all had a cup of tea. and of course, we'd all been heavy, sitting around his bed, and the energy was very low. And then he sort of perked us all up, and we thought, oh, maybe we've had, got a miracle here. And then 2 days later, on the Tuesday, that was a Saturday. So on the Tuesday, my uncle visited, who is a Methodist minister. And we don't know the conversation because we weren't in the room, but we know they had a really long chat about Jesus and scriptures and all of that sort of thing. And he passed that night. And it was almost like he was waiting for my uncle to have that talk and, as you say, give permission. And one of the last words he said when he was still conscious was, "I'm okay now. I'm going to meet Jesus soon." And that had given him so much comfort, so much comfort. And the rest of us weren't religious. And he only had been in later life. But it's what works for you. It's what you're drawn to, isn't it? The way your soul is drawn to something. And I shall never forget that, actually, because as far as he was concerned, he was okay now. And we could be okay because he was going to go and be with Jesus. So it sort of gave him that boost that he needed, maybe that bit of energy to finally see him out. I guess it works differently.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Scott, yeah.
What you have stories? You've been doing this for a while. What are you? A couple of your favorite stories of being a celebrant?
Favorite stories. Well,
Weddings, funerals, whatever.
Weddings. Oh, I could write a book. Funerals. I think one that really stands out was a friend of mine. It was her dad that passed. The whole ceremony was 2 hours, and even the funeral director said that I think that's the longest one. But there was so much to say. This guy was 98. Everybody loved him. Young people came, old people came, and it was full. It was full for usually 98-year-olds don't have so many friends and family left, but this guy did, and it was incredible. And at one point, the sun came in through the window, and it was literally just lit the coffin up, as if to say, oh, I'm just going to sit up in a minute and scare you all. Which is one of the things that his daughter said. I'm sure Tom's going to sit up any minute and say, "Fooled you." So there were some funny bits and some very poignant bits. But weddings, I think, there's a few weddings that stand out as well. There's one where, because a lot of people now go to the registry office, have their legal bit, and then have their main wedding the next day or later the same day, where they get all dressed up and have the ceremony again with a celebrant-led service. And one bride at the registry office kept looking at her watch, and she seemed quite anxious. And it got to the end there, because the ceremonies aren't long. The legal ceremonies can only be about 10-15 minutes. And then she looked at her watch again, and we said, "Are you okay? You seem a bit anxious," because we were a bit worried that it might be that at that point there'd been a scam marriage, and actually she didn't really want to get married or something. And she said, "Oh yeah," she said, "I'm fine." She said, "We just got to pick the kids up at 3 o'clock, and I'm worried we're not going to be done in time." So that was one of the funnier ones. But there was a very poignant one of a man that had a stroke, an older gentleman, I would say in his 60s. And he couldn't talk. He could utter a few sounds. And of course, the wedding ceremony is a verbal contract. So you have to say your vows, otherwise it's not legal. So we were thinking, oh, well, how are we going to get around this? We had to phrase the question in such a way that he could nod and make a noise, and that was his assent. So we could do it that way. And he was a big, burly man, and he was quite proud. And he having difficulty with talking was something really difficult for him. And at the end of the ceremony, after we'd got him through it and announced you are now man and wife, the whole room just burst into tears. It was just such a special moment, because he didn't think he could do it, and neither did his wife. He didn't think he'd get through it, so he was all nervous. And that was a real special moment, because we allowed him that opportunity to say his legal vows. So things like that. And same-sex marriages are often quite poignant as well, because again, couples have been through a lot perhaps to get where they are. And then there was the bride, because again, people pay a lot of money. You're talking between probably £20,000 now for a wedding in this country. Yep. to do it at the way people want to. And we had an outside wedding, and it was all set out with the red carpet and the white chairs with pink ribbons. It looked really pretty, posh hotel, and all set to go. And the bride came round the corner and took one look and went back again. And we thought, oh no, have we got a runaway bride? Does she not want to get married? And the groom was looking a bit worried. And we thought, well, while we were all still thinking, oh, what we're going to do now? We'd better go and find out what's going on. And two of the waiters came out of the hotel with a rolled up carpet on their shoulder. And they rolled up the red carpet and put out a green carpet. and then she came down, and you thought, oh, she didn't like the red carpet, she was being a bit picky. But then when you think about it, you think, this is her day. She didn't want a red carpet. Don't have a red carpet. So obviously something had been miscommunicated there. But again, that was a bit of a scary moment, because no one really knew what to do for a few seconds then. She ran off. So yeah, some very interesting times as a registrar. But I'm glad, because what I could have done is reapplied for my position as a registrar, but it really doesn't pay very well. And I prefer being a celebrant, because I can do it my way and bring much more, what I feel is much more to the service, make it a bit more personal. In the last wedding I did, people said to me after, they said, "Oh, you made us laugh, you made us cry, it was all just so lovely." And you don't get that so much with the registry office. So yeah, I just love what I do. Love it.
I think that I think about the weddings, I'm just thinking about my niece, and when she and her husband got married, they'd had the official sort of bit, they'd done that.
Legal bit.
And you know Willow.
Oh yes, yeah.
So they had a shamanic wedding.
Oh yes.
And Charlotte had got in touch with Willow without knowing that I actually knew her. So it was lovely. So this wedding done, sort of circled with the hay bales and sort of this circle. It was just lovely. It really was good to see Willow as well. So sort of, and in some respects, I think the world is so small. It's not as big as we think it is. There are the connections, and we are, and it's trusting that we're all connected, and just being in that place of, if you're organizing something for yourself, you're bringing a release for yourself and as much joy in what, and hopefully a wedding is going to be a totally joyful occasion.
Yeah, usually.
but obviously but then, okay, sort of you were talking about sort of potentially sort of a young man becoming a young man. And I know certain religions very much do that, and specifically of the Jewish religion, certainly with the boys. But and here in this country, many, many, many years ago, we would have those coming out balls for the young ladies.
Yes, the debutante.
Yes, absolutely. And that was sort of an acknowledgement that, mind you, that was an acknowledgement that they were marriageable. So it wasn't necessarily, but it's important, because I know the conversation we had that brought this program about was that there have got to be other ways. What other things can we bring into these celebrations of life, or celebration of life, the things that are happening in people's lives? What other things that we can do? What can we offer? So people being really open to the type of thing that speaks to them. I know some of the adverts here, they sort of talk about, there's one of them they talk about, and he was a biker, and so they had his coffin sort of being towed by a motorbike, for the funeral. And I know that happens a lot anyway. You potentially have seen that right here in Bournemouth, because you get a really massive biker community. And I've been connected with sort of some of the Hell's Angels. Oh, they've got hearts of gold. But it's not being judgmental about what people's choices are. People have to choose what is right for them, whether it's a wedding, whether it's a funeral, or whether it's some other celebration within life. And that's the important thing. So if anybody's got any suggestions they'd like to make to Jackie of things potentially that could become part of celebrations, or you'd like to pick her brains, please and do it. We're not too far off the end of the program, and I'm going to put your website address into the chat. I'm also going to put it underneath the video. So if you're watching this on a replay on YouTube, please connect with Jackie, you know, sort of whether she can do anything for you on a physical level because you're in a totally different country. But do you know what? If it talking to her, connecting with her supports you and your family in whatever way, you know, sort of it's got to be worth it. You know, it opens up the conversations. And these days, conversations at least can be had. So via the internet and video, very much as we're doing here. So, but if anybody's got any thoughts or any questions, then just bring them forward. Because I'm assuming through your website there's a way to connect with you, Jackie.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, contact form on there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the other things I think it might be worth mentioning is people's pets. And when my neighbour died, you saying about the motorbikes, when he died very suddenly. And he was 65, so he's fairly young. And he had a motorbike cortege in front of the hearse. So there was probably about 20 bikes. So, you know, people look when they see that many bikes. And he was a lover of Welsh Terriers. So when the coffin came out of the hearse, all his Welsh Terrier buddies that were there brought their dogs, and they formed like a guard of honour. And you know what terriers can be like? They can be yapping all over the place, running harum-scarum. Every single one of them behaved. They just lined up like a guard of honour. It's like they knew the sacredness of what was going on, and they were just amazing. I can still see that, and that was another memorable story. And one of the, I did a burial of ashes in a cemetery in Salisbury, quite an old cemetery. And out of nowhere, it was just as we were getting ready to do the service, and of course it was a small plot because it was just a box to go into the ground, and a cat came and sat by the hole. And this cat was like a lion, had a beautiful mane, like Aslan, is it, in Narnia? And this cat sat on the board right next to the hole, next to the plot, for the entire ceremony. And then as it finished, he sort of wandered off between rubbing itself against people's legs as it does, and then just sat there all majestic. And then we found out afterwards that this particular lady that had died was a cat lover. And it was like he was custodian of the cemetery. That was pretty memorable. Yeah. So, you know, maybe that's something else that could go on your list, that you want your pet to be there, or some special significance to do with your pet. Yeah. Don't leave them out because they grieve too.
Yeah. Oh,
really?
Yes.
One quick question: is there any? And I'm not well informed about this, but is there any pagan type rituals for coming of age for men and women?
Pagan, I think there are, and I'm not too involved with the pagan community. I do know a few people, so I could certainly ask the question. I would imagine there are, yes, because they do like the.
I mean, other than going out into the woods with only a spear and having to kill your first boar or something. I'm talking a little bit less intrusive than that, but just ceremonies that might be able to initiate or have a threshold that somebody walks over.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think there probably is in those communities, pagan or druid. But it's certainly something I'd like to explore more.
I would have thought shamanic too, bearing in mind that being part of the wedding for my niece, and the one aspect of it, which was quite amusing. But Charlotte and Sam really didn't know what was going on. It was brilliant. So absolutely. So David, any final sort of thought, comment, question?
Yeah, a couple of things. I'll try and make it quick. My friends had a druid wedding last year, and it was really lovely. They'd done it for themselves and 2 or 3 really close friends, but they'd done a video of it, and it was really beautiful to see that connection with Mother Earth and everything being brought in as one. It was a lovely celebration. Simple, but as you said, Scott, a ceremonial part of it as well. So it was kind of double celebration. But I know we haven't touched on it, but I think it's really important for people. We need to celebrate in life. There's enough difficulty in life, and celebrating life really will help to raise those vibrations for us and healing. But your spiritual journey, I think we've got a couple of minutes. Have you found your spiritual awareness grow or change during these, since you've been doing your Celebrant work?
I think those values are always there. I think as we get older, our thought processes change anyway, and our beliefs. What I believed around the time my brother died is not necessarily what I believe now, but certainly those values about there being more to life than the current reality is definitely still there. I'm not exploring quite as much as I was then, and I certainly don't believe everything I see and hear. So I guess it's gone more internal. My belief system is mine. I don't need anybody to confirm or deny it, because what I believe is what I believe, and that's personal to me. So I think that sort of has become more ingrained in me. I don't go along with everything else now like I used to, the last 20 years or so. But it's that exploration, isn't it? And coming to what feels right for you, and practicing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and doing your meditation or yoga or whatever your practice is. Yeah, that, very personal to everyone. Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you so much, folks. Any final comments before we close? No, we're Jackie, thank you so much for joining. Hopefully it won't be too long till I see you again in person. Thank you so very much for joining us, for bringing this conversation, because I think it's a conversation that is so important to have. And this is what today's conversation is meant to be about. It's maybe having some of the more difficult things. And it's really important to do that, because people do struggle with the conversation, certainly about around end of life and funerals, not so much about weddings, but then that's probably the more difficult part, is the cost. Yes, it's valuing life. And I think that's what this is really sort of all about. And thank you for being who you are and doing what you do, and supporting people at that time of life. And hopefully people will have listened to this, and it will open them up to sort of, yes, maybe we do need to think about it. It doesn't mean we're going to die tomorrow, but it's important to think about it and have it in place so that it supports everyone. So thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you to Scott and David as well for your participation in this conversation. And I'm really delighted next week, which is going to be in the morning here in the UK, because Scott, you will be aware of these people. I've got Janine Samia, Gwenda Smith, Mary Jo, and Steve Halligan, all coming on a program. Oh yes, Scott and myself are part of a new book that's coming out next month as in October 2024. And the book's called Gifts of Wisdom. The title of the program is The Gift of Wisdom Found Within Life's Experiences. So sort of, and because obviously they're in Australia and New Zealand, that's why it's the first thing in the morning for me, so that it's a good time for them where they are in the world. So if you can't join us live at that time in the morning, it's as with all programs, they're being recorded. thank you again, folks. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Love, peace, and light.
Thank you.
Good souls.
Bye-bye.
Never stay.